Good evening. The doctor is in.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi.
It's so good to see you all. Oh my goodness, look at all these gorgeous faces.
I know we've got some black girl magic happening, like Mo. And guess what, you
Welcome.
guys?
Absolutely.
Welcome. We are pretending that we are in San Antonio. Like I'm gonna eat chicken enchiladas when we're done.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
if we didn't have COVID, we'd be in San Antonio, right? So
That's right.
so you guys, we have a great show, and we are doing a medical update from the biggest breast cancer conference in the world, really. And I mean, last year we had 14,000 people in San Antonio, and it's where all the research comes out, all the data comes out, all, doctors, everybody involved in breast cancer are in the house. And so we're just going to pretend we're there and bring you an update from what's going on there and all the new learnings. And so, Dr. Mo, we have some great guests tonight.
Oh my gosh. I am so excited to see Dr. Davis. Dr. Melissa's here in the house. We have our survivor and our thriver here in the house, Crystal Brown Tatum. I want you guys to do a round robin and tell us about yourselves, a little bit about your journey, and then we're going to talk about San Antonio and why it is what's going on here and why people need to know about it. Because I think for a long time, outside of the immediate cancer doctor community, San Antonio Breast Conference, its breast symposium, was a really research heavy, science heavy. All the docs, all the scientists were there. But now the patients, the advocates, the supporters, I mean, we're talking diversity this year. This is some stuff we've never seen before. And so we got to get into this. So let us start. Dr. Davis, you want to start, and then we'll go over to Crystal?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for having me back. I had a wonderful time talking with you guys last time. So, I'm a molecular geneticist slash computational biologist by training, which just means I use a lot of coding to do genetics research. I am at Weill Cornell Medicine. I study breast cancer subtypes. Some of our work was actually highlighted at San Antonio this last couple of days. And, I'm so happy to be here to talk with everyone and hopefully convey some hope about some of the new findings and ongoing research.
Great. Girl crush.
Definitely.
And Crystal.
Thanks. Well, I'm Crystal Brown Tatum. I'm actually a San Antonio native, so I kind of feel like I'm at home with you all. I will reach 14 years as a triple negative breast cancer survivor. I was diagnosed at the age of 35. At the time, I still am an Army wife. At the time, we were stationed in Louisiana, and the doctors there were really surprised at the advanced stage of my breast cancer. They were really taken aback that it was triple negative. And I was actually given, really never understood why I was given 3 years. I would ask the doctor the charts that she would present to me. I would ask her the median age of the woman in the study, and she would say, I don't know. And I said, well, what country was that study done? How many of those participants were African-American women? And she was like, I don't know that either. I said, but you're giving me an outcome based on data, but you're not telling me who was in the study. So that was really interesting to me. Most people are really surprised when they hear I had my chemotherapy was for 4 rounds. It was Taxotere, epirubicin, and Cytoxan. That TEC protocol, for whatever reason, that takes a lot of doctors back. They're like, you got all 3 of those at the same time. But I am thriving. I had a lumpectomy because of where the tumor was located. I had 37 and a half rounds of radiation. And it goes without saying that I'm grateful. And I hope to be an inspiration for any TNBC patient that hears my story. And I thank the foundation for all that they do for patients like myself.
Wow, that's incredible.
We're actually doing the SHOMO in partnership with the Triple
Mm-hmm.
Negative Breast Cancer Foundation. They're my home advocacy group. I've been on the board really since I was sick almost. I probably almost 7 years or so. And so they do great work. And we've really worked hard to make the Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation website a home for this devastating disease that affects Black women at twice the rate. We don't really know why. And Dr. Melissa, you can talk a little bit about that. And we're the only breast cancer subtype that does not have a treatment to prevent recurrence. And
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Ricky. And I think, before we get into a lot of the science, understanding even what triple negative means, because there may be some people
yeah,
watching who, even just got diagnosed today. And I know I probably had this conversation with 5 patients in my office today about their breast cancer subtype and why it matters. And I'm going to let Dr. Davis chime in a little bit on subtype. But when we talk about triple negative, the easiest way, I think, or from an advocate standpoint, when I talk to a patient, I talk to them as if they are my family member, or if I were sitting in that seat beside them, what questions would I be asking as the advocate? And so understanding the tumor subtype means understanding the hormone receptors. That's a huge part of it. And hormone receptors are the places on the cancer cell that receive the signal from the bloodstream. Dr. Davis, you can chime in if I'm, saying anything that's incorrect, but basically I tell patients like this. I see you smiling over there. It's like toll booths on the turnpike. This is the easiest way to understand it. And there are 3 in particular that we look for on cancer cells to understand if they can receive the signal or the dollar in order to make a transaction happen. So estrogen is your dollar. If you have an estrogen receptor, then you pay your dollar, it goes through the toll, you trigger new cancer cells to grow, proliferation, other things to happen inside those cancer cells. Women who don't have those receptors on their cells, when we look under that microscope, we put a little dye down and we count the number of cells. What percentage have an estrogen receptor? What percentage have the receptor or the toll booth to receive progesterone? What percentage have the toll booth or the place to receive the HER2 signal? And when we don't see them, well, those women are like in the easy pass lane, right? And I don't know what other states have besides easy pass, but basically, if you've got one of those passes in your car, you're not using dollars. So giving you a pill or something that takes away dollars would be useless. And this is why people can't get things like tamoxifen or some of those other estrogen blocking agents. You're in a different lane, and that lane tends to be an express lane. It's a little bit faster, right, Doc? What do you think is important, I guess, for patients to know as far as, what Crystal was saying? You asked some really savvy questions, right? Like who was in the study and how old were they? Dr. Davis, tell us some things that people should know if they're going to evaluate research, or even questions to ask their doctors about the type of research.
Well, even before I get into what questions to ask, I think it's really important to just, empower you to ask questions. Don't just receive the information as though, it's your life. I think that it's very important that you feel empowered to ask, those detailed questions about what is being proposed to treat your disease, So, yeah, absolutely. You can ask questions around, as Dr. Mo just mentioned, what the way we speak about it in clinic is, what are the indications of whether or not you are eligible for a trial, right, or eligible for a treatment. And like she just explained, if you do not have a certain gene signature, you are not eligible for certain treatment. And so you can ask very broad questions about, what are all the options. Ask them about your diagnosis. Why is it whatever it is? Ask them to explain that to you. As far as, the treatment, you can ask for like the statistics around people like you. So how well has this performed in people like me? Hopefully you'll have a clinician like Dr. Mo, who is well informed. She's your advocate. They're going to find all of the potential options for you based on all of the information they have about your diagnosis. And you can be a part of that sort of decision making, right? Ask them, what are they considering? And I would even say, at that moment, sometimes it's difficult to even remember what to ask. I can tell you right now what the best questions are, but in that moment, you may be overwhelmed with what all is happening, and having a
Yeah.
partner with you when you go to help remind you of what it was you needed to ask, writing it down, and asking for literature, something, information for you to have with you when you go back home after that stressful moment of being in that space, and just being able to calm down and absorb all the information that was given to you. Um, and I like the fact that we're telling patients to ask that of clinicians, because it also then sort of gives them the incentive to, first of all, know the answers to those questions. But
Right.
secondly, when they look for the answers to those questions, they also need to be aware of, maybe there aren't enough people in the data around, clinical trials, or the basic research, about certain treatments. And so then when the clinicians push back, about, we need more information about a certain patient group, that's when things start to shift on my plane. And then we start getting, better inclusion of, diversity
Yeah.
in the research. We can use this as a tool for recruitment, and even just pressuring people to make sure that when you set up your study design, you are purposely including, diverse populations in your research.
Well, you've done such a great job of that. Most people aren't doing that, Dr. Melissa. You know that's one of our things that we're trying to work on, to get more Black women into the research, into the trials. So
And it
Absolutely.
has to be a forethought, it can't be the afterthought.
Exactly.
Like these
right,
are
it has to
things
be
you can
planned
take into account in the study design for sure.
in the plan.
Exactly.
Dr. Monique, I had a question for you. I should have pointed out my grandmother, she was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 80. She lived to be 85. Unfortunately, she passed away before my own diagnosis. Is it fair to assume because she took tamoxifen that she was not triple negative? I don't know anything about her breast cancer.
That's a pretty good assumption, because what that means is that she had an estrogen receptor on her cancer cells. So she was at least ER positive. And so that's why they gave her an estrogen blocking medicine. She might have had some bone density issues, which is why they put her on the tamoxifen, which they a lot of times will put the premenopausal women on. So blocking estrogen takes two forms. You either block it in premenopausal women through the ovaries, or you block the conversion of it in postmenopausal women because they don't have
Mhm.
ovaries that are producing estrogen anymore. So yeah, that's a really great question, and one that I'm sure a lot of people have. So Dr. Melissa, when we talk about, when we go to San Antonio, I remember the first time I went and I presented a poster, and it is this huge, huge meeting hall full of sessions and poster after poster after poster. Tell us a little bit about um, some of the big studies, or the things that you go for every year. What are the things that you're going to hear there, and some of the things that we should be looking for as surgeons, but also as patients and advocates? What are some of the key sessions that they might want to check out even now?
Well, so what's interesting about San Antonio is that, like you said, it's exhausting, really. I mean, it's so much information. I usually have numb brain, by the end of the day, because there's so much ongoing, back to back, overlapping. It's like shuttling from one room to the next. I think that one of the things I typically look for is the diversity. I am
Hmm.
really interested, especially with triple negative breast cancer, to see, what is emerging, even from the basic science to the translation. So they call this bench to bedside, right? So the
Hmm.
things that are what we consider as scientists still sort of the basic science around, because again, like you just described, how we define triple negative breast cancer in clinic is the lack of these hormone receptors. We
Hmm.
still haven't done a very good job yet of having a clinical diagnostic that can tell us what is driving, the triple negative breast cancer cells to grow. So, for instance, for those estrogen receptor positive tumors, we know that estrogen receptor is responding to estrogen hormones. And that's why the tumors start to proliferate or divide uncontrollably. For triple negative breast cancer, all we know is that it's not that, right? It's negative for those receptors. So therefore it's not responding to steroids. And so I definitely go to find any talks, any presentations, posters that say they have identified, some driver of triple
Mhm.
negative breast cancer. I look for things that, talk about what we call targetable or druggable findings. So if they identify what we call upregulation of a gene, or maybe it's even what we call a gene fusion. So, like sometimes in cancer cells, two genes that are far apart, maybe on different chromosomes, somehow get spliced together, and those gene fusions create a druggable target. So, I look for things like that. And this year, in particular, as Dr. Mo mentioned in her intro, I was struck by the diversity. I mean, one of the first sessions was about disparities, and it was opened up by this beautiful African American woman.
Dr. Lily, our Mema
That's
come up.
right.
Yes.
She's our
And
breastie.
She's our birthday. We love our Mema. She did so great. It was so great.
yes,
So
it was
proud of her.
beautiful. It was beautiful. And, a whole session of just talk after talk about not only, the science, but the policies, that are barriers to minority populations, and why we see, disparities in outcomes, and, some of the things that we can do, from the sort of community space to make sure that what we do have available, which currently I think that the first line to survival of triple negative is going to be early detection.
Hmm.
And so,
Oh, yeah.
looking for that. And then any ongoing clinical trials, which I think we're going to talk about here in a minute, where they're actively in clinic testing different ways to treat those aggressive tumors that seem like they're beyond hope. But, we're looking for the people in the studies that have actually identified really innovative new ways to treat the tumors, to give people a fighting chance to survive the diagnosis.
Absolutely. And I think we got to talk and make sure that everybody understands that clinical trials are a really well thought out and well oiled machine, and they happen in phases. So COVID-19 has been a good reason for everybody to sort of understand the concept of trials of people on drugs, right?
Yes.
But did you know, if you are watching, that there are phases to these trials? So we don't just start giving them to people right away. We start in the laboratory, right, Dr. Davis? We starting in petri dishes and little tiny pipettes and little, right, I mean, micro volumes, millimoles, even little drops smaller than a teardrop.
Yep.
We can extract information and begin to look at drug targets and why things work. So there are phases to trials. There are phase 1 trials. Even before phase 1, there are preclinical and translational trials, right? Once we figure something works in a petri dish, it works in a mouse model, we then can try it in people. So we got phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials. Once we find the dose that is starting to, once we find that the drug works, then we got to find what dose it works and start to look at side effects. And then we got to see how safe it is and what's the minimum safest dose of this to give to people. And so I would say to people who are watching, if you're interested in a clinical trial, especially if you have triple negative breast cancer, understand that there are different types of trials and different phases of trials that you can even get involved in. And so the first step is to find a really good resource like the Triple Negative Foundation, like Touch BBCA, like cancer.gov. And we're going to put these in the chat for you so that you'll be able to see, if you're interested, how do you even begin looking up a clinical trial to see where it is? Because number one reason, sure, Crystal, hang on one second. The number one reason Black women don't participate in these trials is because they are not asked. And so it might be you that has to ask your doctor, hey, am I a candidate for a clinical trial? Even if you don't want to do a trial, you just want to see what your doctor says to see if they're in the know. This is what I would do. I would say, doc, what about a trial? Are any trials that I'm eligible for? And then just see if they look like a deer in headlights. You might want to maybe think about a larger cancer institute.
Right.
That's
Right.
Or
right.
if they say, well, let's look it up together. I'm not sure, but I know where to go. That's a great doctor who's going to partner with you. They don't have to have all the answers, but they got to know where to find them. Krista,
And
what were
Exactly.
you
you know,
going to ask?
oh,
Yes, so I am a patient ambassador with PCORI, Patient Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And part of my role is educating people about clinical trials. A lot of African Americans still cite Tuskegee. Just looking on my own social media, people talking about the vaccine, the attitudes are, hell no, I'm not taking the vaccine.
right.
So until we can educate ourselves about the safety of these trials and why representation is so important, I encourage people, address your fears. It's reasonable to be fearful of a clinical trial, absolutely, but you can overcome that fear. And really, I can't stress that enough, the importance of participation. I know people are scared, I get it, but we're long past the days of Tuskegee.
Yeah, and I also believe, Crystal, that we don't have enough data on Black bodies. And I really believe that our Black breast cancer is different because our bodies are different and we don't know how the drugs are going to work on us because we haven't been in the tests. And so it's really important that we as Black people participate in the research so we can make the drugs work for us, get drugs that work for us.
I think that's a
So
really good
Dr. Melissa,
point.
yeah,
Ricky,
I
I
was going
was
to
I
say,
was just going to say this one poster that I was even looking at, is it's a phase 1 trial for metastatic breast cancer and for heavily pretreated metastatic breast cancer. So triple negative. And you've gone through several lines of treatment already and nothing has worked. Right. And so when you look at who was in this trial and the outcomes are pretty interesting and pretty good. But the first thing I always look at, and I know you too, probably Dr. Melissa, look at the demographics, right?
right,
How many were
right.
how
And
many
Black,
were female? How many were male? There's something to think about too. But then look at the race. How many were African American? And
right,
those numbers pretty small, I have to tell you. And the size of the study, because it's a phase 1 trial, you're only talking about, 52 people in each population. These are not designed to be like Pfizer's 43,000, participants. And the study that I'm looking at in particular, so that we're all on the same page, it is the study that looks at the pro-inflammatory microenvironment. It's the Keynote 119, right? So Keynote 086 and Keynote 119, they took those studies and now they're trying to figure out, okay, so if we inject the tumor with something, will it then work in patients who have inoperable cancers? Because sometimes we see those patients. I saw a lady last week, whose cancer, she refused chemotherapy. She's refusing everything else, radiation. She wants surgery, but surgery is not going to be curative for her. And so how do we manage those patients? Doc, let's talk a little bit about when you look at a poster, like this one, this phase 2 open label study of intratumoral intratumoral tavo.
I'm glad
And
you,
don't let the words, catch you off guard because they put the little abbreviation in there. So if you happen to be one of those people like Crystal who's invested and you're going to do the research, don't get turned off by all these drug names. They are what they are. You can call them,
right.
Abraham Lincoln if you want to
Make
rename
it
them.
snap. Make it
I
snap.
like to rename them, call it Henry and call it Juneba, call it whatever you want, as long as you get the message of what that trial is trying to say to you. But we're looking at injecting the tumors themselves, right? And then in combination with some IV therapy. What's the things that stick out to you about studies like this?
Well, so first of all, what you just said, of course, I'm looking at the demographics as well, and it's like tisk tisk, but then I'm also considering things that Crystal just mentioned, which is in our community, the word trial can be a
Mhm.
little, daunting or, scary to consider, and especially if you're already dealing with a diagnosis that you think is going to end your life and they're telling you that you have limited options, but we have this experimental thing that we could try. I think that to address this particular study, I want to touch on two things. So this particular study is really trying to identify a way to activate something that's naturally occurring when you have cancer, and that is your immune response. And so, what my work actually shows is that people who are of African descent have a distinct immune response in their triple negative tumors. This is one of the things that we presented at San Antonio. Specifically, we measured like the genetic background and then looked within the tumors to determine a lot of different things. But one of the things that stood out was the immune response. And so now we're talking about these new immunotherapy options, which for a lot of patients, when they work, they look miraculous. Other patients, you still don't see the type of response that you need to see. So this particular study is doing something to utilize a molecule, if you will, that usually occurs naturally in a patient who has a positive immune response, so something that would fight the tumor. And they're trying to basically put it into the person, like their body didn't naturally, mount up this immunological response. And so they're just artificially adding it to the patient. Now, in previous studies around this molecule, what they found was when they injected it into the bloodstream, it caused sickness, toxicities is what we're talking about. And so they would see systemically other organs that weren't really involved in the cancer start to deteriorate. And so now in this, sort of new phase of how we would activate the immune response in the tumors, they're directly injecting this into the tumor. So that's what intratumoral injection means. So now we're going straight to the tumor. None of this, put it in your arm, put it in your shoulder, and eventually it'll get to your breast or wherever the metastatic tumors are. We're going straight to the tumor. And they're seeing some really good responses. But, there's also what I just described, which is in people of African descent, even if you inject this particular molecule, if what's already present is distinct from the people in this trial, even though they're seeing like a lot of positive response in the patients in this trial, if the people in the trial aren't representative of the diversity of individuals who have other types of immune responses going on, then that's something that they need to know upfront and address before this becomes standard of care. And then we're still helping a certain group of patients more than another, and in that regard just widening the gap of disparate outcome. So that was a couple of things that kind of stood out to me. Is this is physically targeted therapy. We call targeted therapy, a specific molecule that we're trying to attack on the tumor, but you usually take it by mouth or injection, systemically. But this is physically targeting, the actual tumor itself. And so I kind of like that because it limits the toxicity. But, I also wonder, and Dr. Mo, maybe you can chime in on this, how practical is it for someone with metastatic cancer where they have metastases in areas that they can't actually inject to? How do we
Right.
consider a thing
And
about
and it
that?
becomes what we call multimodal approach to treatment. And so it would not be just intratumoral injections. It wouldn't just be, systemic chemotherapy. It would be a combination of things, including things like radiation, targeted radiation. For example, if metastatic disease is in the brain, then we may do some proton therapy or radiation that's just targeted to those key areas. And so it really depends on where it is. And for, this particular study, when you look at the poster, I mean, there's a breast with what we call a fungating mass. It's growing through the skin into the chest wall, and you can see that the cancer is really advanced. And so injecting something into that tumor could potentially be helpful to see some improvement in the tumor's response to even systemic therapy. But it's it's a very experimental approach is what I'll say. It is not a very widely accepted
Right.
approach just yet, but it is a promise, right? Because in some places in the country, they are doing things like regional chemotherapy. And for some people, again, not a lot of Black women in those trials, but there
No.
are some people, we're starting to see some good, maybe 3-year, 5-year survival data for those people. And it's a small minority of people, because once breast cancer has left the breast, well, the treatment then becomes systemic. You got to treat the whole body and even when it's just in the breast, you still need to treat the whole body. But
Yes.
surgery is no longer the curative thing once it has left the breast. It's a combination of things. So to answer your question, it's tough, because these are people who have a pretty poor prognosis altogether, and they've tried a bunch of different drugs that haven't worked, and maybe they're getting radiation as well to try to close their skin and at least control what's happening there. But it's a promising approach, because like you mentioned, we want to do things that are less toxic overall for our patients, and if we can target just where that tumor is, that's an important thing. And it brings to mind a subject or a topic that we're starting to hear more and more about, the tumor microenvironment. Can you comment on what that is? So for the average person to understand, if they're looking at some posters or even just trying to figure out why cancer happens in some places instead of others, what's the tumor's microenvironment?
So just like, I'm gonna try to do one of these Dr. Mo analogies. I'm gonna probably fail, but chime back in. So, when you think about an organ like your breast, as opposed to your entire body, if we think about this like a house, and if you, where you are in your home, your whole house is part of your environment, but then so is the room that you're in, right? And so for a tumor, the microenvironment would be like the bedroom, you know what I mean? So what's actually in the bedroom? What's the temperature in the bedroom? What are the smells and, the humidity in the bedroom? And so when we think about a tumor's microenvironment, we're not just thinking about the whole person as, one entity, this person. We're actually looking around the tumor. A tumor doesn't actually just grow as like an orb, right? It actually has finger-like projections. And so we look at where are the projections going, and why is the tumor growing in this direction or like that. And so we look in between the tumor cells, and in between the tumor cells are other structural cells that make up, just the breast in general. So we're talking about cells that are called fibroblasts, immune cells, other types of cells that basically give the breast its shape and also its function. So the breast is a gland. It is designed to produce milk. And so it has ducts and lobules, and so we consider all of those things. But what's really also coming to light in the microenvironment are other organisms. So bacteria, the microbiome, so microorganisms. And this isn't weird. It's not strange. It's actually very natural that you have other organisms, inside, and these bacteria can be helpful
You know what
depending
I
on
just
which ones
heard?
they are. What's that?
I just heard compost, garden, grow. Boom. Right? Because think about it. Okay, so here we are, right? You're going to grow your herb garden, right? But what do you use? You use fertilizer to help make things grow, right? You use compost, right? Compost is
Right.
decomposing
Right.
material. And so when you talk about, you said a really key word, the microbiome, where this tumor is living, what's the environment like? What's the
Right.
soil like? And
Exactly.
and it's important for patients to understand that we look at now more than ever the environment the tumor lives in, because that helps us understand what factors are making it grow, right? What's the fertilizer, or what's the what's going to be the weed killer, right? What are we going to use to kill this tumor?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what one of these posters is talking about here. So when we inject the tumor with Tabo, it then helps to sensitize the body and the cancer to some of the more conventional therapies. And that was a poster from work done at Duke, and this is really exciting, because we can find that if we do something in the local environment, now it affects how that garden is growing, and we can kill some weeds here. And that's basically what this poster is saying. But you got it, Dr. Davis. Yeah, your explanation was like
Was
I'm
spot
learning.
on,
I'm
you know,
learning
and
from
this
the.
is
I'm learning from the best.
so silly. But this is why I tell patients too, you got to boost your immunity, you and your immune system and your nutrition, right? Because of a concept, one key concept called bacterial translocation. So we know that moving our bowels is important for colon cancer, but not just for colon cancer. The longer contaminants and bacteria and toxicity sit in the colon, it gets into the bloodstream. And guess where it goes? That's called bacterial translocation, out of your colon into your bloodstream. And it finds the places, it finds the gardens that are ready for the compost. And it creates a whole environment for these tumors to grow. And
Keep a
so this is a
fertile
reason
ground.
why we started to look at even the gut microbiome for breast cancer patients. What's in your gut gets into your body, and it creates little beds of nastiness for cancers and things to grow. And that's why you got to eat your fiber. That's why you need to
That's
be
right.
doing these green vegetables and dark leafy stuff. It's why you need those antioxidants to, one, yeah, help get rid of it through the antioxidants, but two, move that stuff out of your system.
Move it out. Yeah.
That is probably the number one question in the Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation Facebook when I post like my cancerversary.
Yeah.
The number one question that survivors or thrivers ask me, Crystal, what did you do to your lifestyle? You know, did you improve your diet? Yes. Did I start exercising more? Yes. I eliminate stress. But people always ask me what my diet consists of. And so to
Yeah.
piggyback on what you just said.
Yeah.
No, it's very important. I mean,
Love that.
to the extent, not only sort of prophylactic, antioxidants, but just generally, sugar intake. There's a lot of information now coming out that, even again, some of the things we're seeing in the tumor is amazing. I mean, we're actually seeing signatures of diabetes
Wow.
in your tumor,
Wow.
obesity markers in your tumor, not just in your fat cells around your waist, right? But obesity creates a metabolic signal in your entire body, and it can impact every organ in your body. And so it's very important that any comorbidity that you have, whether it's diabetes, obesity, hypertension, anything that could offset that delicate balance that your body is on, that you need to make sure you stay on top of that. And I love the concept of like, how can we transfer good bacteria, you know what I mean? So there's bad bacteria, bad microbiome, and then there's good microbiome. And I think there's a lot of research around that as well in San Antonio.
Yeah. So what you guys, what's the most exciting thing coming out of this week for patients? Like, where can we give people some hope? Some people that may be metastatic or maybe even have early stage triple negative. What should we look to? I know there's been so much work done, but where can we give some hope to people of something that they could actually act on soon?
I think it's a great question. And I think, one key answer is that the hope is in that the studies are being done. There are so many studies and sessions on triple negative breast cancer this time around with good results all across the board. So no matter what stage you are, somebody's working on it. And I think that's the one first really hopeful thing, is that it's not being just talked about, oh, well, we understand triple negative breast cancer has a higher rate of recurrence. And we should talk about that too. And I think we got to clarify that, right? Because, people hear triple negative, just like you, Ricky, you said the first time you heard it and you said you heard a death sentence, few years, and that was it for you.
Right.
But the statistics show that while triple negative breast cancer is more aggressive and does have a higher rate of recurrence in the first 5 years, after 5 years, that risk of it coming back and becoming metastatic it sort of tapers down, as opposed to those people who have the ER/PR positive subtypes of breast cancer. So about 40% of people who have stage 1 through 3 triple negative breast cancer might get a recurrence. But about 60%, so 6 out of 10, are going to have long-term, more than 10 years, disease-free survival, more than 10, more than 15. We're talking people who can live long, healthy, happy lives like Crystal. She's a key example of the fact that, yeah, you can live cancer-free from triple-negative breast cancer. Is it a
Domo,
thought?
I hear that, but I still worry about the black thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because, and we don't know the numbers for triple negative, but we know that we have a 39% higher recurrence rate of all breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think, like what Crystal said about diet and everything is so important. But I
It
think,
is.
we need, what can we do kind of to help people who are sick right now and like need something, need some information or that they can go to their doctors about. And it may not be quite ready yet, but there could be trials to get in. I know we put a clinical trial link in the chat. But I
Mm-hmm.
think, there's some really good stuff going on with Keytruda, you
Yep.
know, as a new therapy. I know this week coming out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And they so keynote 890 is a phase 2 trial, and so it's in patients with uh, metastatic triple negative breast cancer that has been what we call refractory to or non-responsive to the traditional chemotherapies, because this is where we start getting into the weeds and the uh-oh and the worry and the that we get fatalistic about our cancer if it stops responding. But there's some new targets. So PD1
Yeah.
checkpoint, when we can target the PD1 checkpoint with an inhibitor, right? Which is basically so Keytruda is an anti-PD1 checkpoint inhibitor. So checkpoints are they're the safety checkpoints, like you go through the airport, right? The TSA checkpoints. And so if the checkpoint's not working, then the cells are going to continue to be faulty and make mistakes and sneak in some friends, right? And all of a sudden you got a party plane full of people who
Right.
aren't supposed to be there. So if the
Right.
checkpoint's not working, there you go,
Right.
Dr. Melissa. And so Keytruda has been a really amazing drug. It's called pembrolizumab,
Yeah.
right? And it's a monoclonal antibody, so it just targets that checkpoint. It's not going to blow up the whole airport, just the checkpoint. So these are great drugs that are more targeted. And what we find is, so the keynote trial, for example, 890, is giving something intratumoral, and it helps now the Keytruda to work better. And so those are things that are really important, because if you've got triple negative breast cancer metastatic. A friend of mine texted me 2 weeks ago. She says, listen, it's not working. What do I do next? There are some trials that we got to talk about, and you should be talking to your doctor about drugs like Keytruda, so that we can so we can help to see if this might work for you. So I think that that's a really positive thing,
Yeah.
as far as that drug's concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, she pointed out that this is a phase 2 trial, and I think that first of all is something to celebrate because it passed phase 1. As Dr. Mo mentioned,
Right.
clinical
Every
trials.
advancement helps, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So like it went from first in human, meaning, the first time we took it out of the animal model and put it in people, and it passed, that first phase. And now they think they have the dosing, to the point where it's actually getting a positive response in a significant portion of the people who have, been a part of the trial. And I think that in itself should give you hope. And I think in the chat they've even like listed clinical trial information. I think that one of the things that was really from thinking about patient facing issues, right? Because I tend to think about things from a investigator facing issue, but from a patient facing issue, one of the things that was really encouraging to me is in the realm of disparities, how broad the scope of the question, the problem is being discussed now. So without a doubt, earlier diagnosis is always better. The sooner we catch it, you know. But even then, there are some barriers that now we have better tools, better awareness, that we are engaging the clinicians more about implicit bias. And the word that they tend to use is patient compliance, which I don't necessarily like because, it kind of puts the onus on, you know, the patient isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And
I
can the
hate that.
patient,
I hate
I
that when you
know,
do that.
Yeah,
That-
that's a what do
No,
they call those? That's a dog whistle. Ooh, that's a
no,
dog whistle right there.
yeah, exactly. But now the conversation is pivoting to it's sort of your responsibility, doc, to identify the barriers and help them overcome those. You know, maybe this isn't the right scenario that you presented with this particular patient, or this patient needs better assistance with, you know, being able to. You know, it's not a compliance issue. I don't think anyone would not take all of their medicine if they had enough money to buy it, if it wasn't making them sick and they didn't have to work through it. You know, I
Right.
think that all of those sort of social determinants are being brought to the table this time in context of clinical trials. And, you know, one of the talks that I saw was really getting at why, given the same treatment, are we not seeing better response in certain patient groups? And so, like,
Mm,
the question came to the table, well, are you really giving them the same treatment? Like,
about it.
Wow.
like the prescription was the same, but if we look at the radiation dosing, it was under, it was under the amount that was supposed to be given. Even, you know what I mean? And maybe it's
Yeah.
because it was toxic to the patient, but nevertheless, all I'm saying is, to me, that's hopeful, because it's no longer just being, shrugged away like this is a problematic population. It's more about finding out what the real barriers are, and breaking them down.
And
If
our,
I can just add, I'm sorry,
go ahead, go ahead, Leah.
looking at a patient abstract when I'm editing one and that you're looking at the limitations of the study, I always want to question when they say people dropped out or they didn't complete the online
Right.
assessment. Did they have computer access? Maybe they didn't return to the clinic because they didn't have transportation. So I'm always thinking about what those barriers were for the participants instead of just saying they were non-compliant, making sure that they capture the limitations, right? That are probably socioeconomic for a lot of people. So thank you.
And yeah. And in smaller community settings, a lot of it has to do with the manpower, right? Because if you are going to truly do a trial justice, if there are these challenges and there are these barriers, how do you address these within your community setting? What are the resources? If your navigator is also your trials coordinator, is also calling patients, is also prior auth and MRIs, right? And also going to see patients after they have abnormal mammograms, well, now they're wearing 5 hats. And so when we talk about the funding and the resources available for research, we have to make sure that these are some of the things that we address. It is not just money for drugs, but it's money to be able to get a tablet to a patient, or it's money to have a patient advocate be able to do a phone call, say, hey, Ms. Jenkins, I noticed you didn't fill out your survey. Can we get this done over the phone? Right? But that takes time and resources and thought and thoughtful planning, not just from the people behind the bench, no, but also the doctors and the people who are involved. And this is why the committees are so important, like IRB, because they're composed of people who are lay people. They're composed of people from religious backgrounds. They're composed of people from the pharmacy. Everybody sits at this table and says, okay, here's what we think we need to make a trial successful. Here's
Right.
what this doctor needs to do, or
Right.
these researchers need to do. And so I think it's so important for patients to not get overwhelmed by all of this. This is a heavy topic today, but the goal of it is to give people hope and to say, yes, you can begin to look at these trials. You can do this research. You can click these links, and you can try to understand it for yourself, and always be comfortable enough to ask your doctor about it, even if it doesn't apply to you, or if you don't know if it applies to you. Just say, hey, listen, I read this. I was looking at the San Antonio conference on something, and can this work for me? Is this something for me? And then let your doctor be able to have that conversation with you. And you're right, Dr. Davis. We do have to do a better job as physicians. We can't just say, patient didn't participate, or patient dropped out, or all those things that we kind of, those blanket statements, because what we know is that even when the trials are designed really well, if the doctors are not meeting the patients where they are,
Exactly.
right? If we talk over their heads, boom, they're lost. If we don't take into account their values or their cultural beliefs, boom, they're gone.
They're
If there's
gone.
financial barriers, if there's emotional barriers, if there's psychosocial barriers, you're going to lose that patient from that trial. And so all of it, that, like the
Literacy
microbiome,
levels, you
They're
assume that they
excuses. They're
understand.
excuses.
say that health literacy, talk about health
Exactly.
literacy. And I want to talk about the cancer community microbiome. That's a new, I'm a coin that one, right? Because we need a whole microbiome for clinical trials to make those trials grow.
If I had a lot of money, I would build a clinical trial facility in every city. in every major city, where you walk in and the grandma meets you at the door, gives you a cup of tea, takes you to the cushy chair, and then gives you a shot. But because we have to enhance comfort and make it comfortable right now, we're scared. And
You're giving grandmas a bad name.
I
Wait a
know,
minute.
but I'm a grandma. I would do it. But no, to me, it's more about we're putting her in a position of being vulnerable, right? And we're taking away her power. I mean, we're powerful people, Black women. We're strong and we're badasses. And when you strip us of our power and our control and make us feel vulnerable, anything can happen and anything can become an excuse. So we have to help people know that they are empowered to do the right thing for their bodies, for their daughters, for their granddaughters, and that's who we're doing this for. So when you think about a clinical trial, it's not just for you, and clearly you want to help yourself and do the right thing by your own health, but you're helping your daughters.
Yeah.
You're helping everybody. So
and one of the things I heard one of the presenters say at San Antonio was, cancer patients are going through an endurance test, through this whole process of getting treatment. It's not just,
yeah,
showing up today to take this pill or get this
yeah,
shot. It's like a long journey and it's very exhausting, and I think, having support along the way is so vital to, first of all, having, a good response of your treatment. We talk about removing stress. We talk about, removing barriers, but just little things, like, transportation, for instance. How much would it cost, I wonder, to just sponsor, Ricky's clinical trial salon spa
right.
to like provide.
Don't tell her that there will be a grant for it next week.
I want to see it, and just the Uber, you can't get here,
Right.
pay for your Uber, like, don't ever let that be the reason you don't show
Those
up.
are excuses. Those are excuses that we can throw money at, but we need to really get people comfortable with science and get over the history, because you know what? I know people in trials are getting great care. They're getting a better quality of care. They're getting more scans. They're getting a lot of attention. And so all of the stuff that we're seeing in San Antonio on the horizon, we should be all in it. We should be all in it. Trying to be
I'll tell you.
doctor's sport. Everybody's different. So ask your doctor, but get into it. If you're sick and you want to live and you want to like get rid of this TMBC thing, help yourself and help other people. Get into it. Ask your doctor for it, and don't be afraid.
Yep.
And they're not going to give you something that's not safe. The worst you're going to get is standard of care. Can you explain that, you guys, what standard of care means to people? Because I think people think they're going to get the placebo drug and get a glass of water or the pill the sugar pill, right? But you're not. Can you explain what that is to people?
Yeah, I think every patient, and this is what Crystal was getting at with health literacy too. When you first get diagnosed, you should know, or if you're a family member, advocate, whatever, there are places that you can go to understand what the standard of care is. There are called guidelines, right? And so one website in particular is called NCCN, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, nccn.org. And the NCCN is one of the governing bodies for how all doctors treat cancer. It's different for, let's say, MD Anderson. Sometimes they have their own algorithms, or Sloan Kettering. But one of the major national guidelines is the NCCN. And it's a website you can go to, and you can type in your type of cancer, breast, lung, whatever, and you can see how do doctors begin to diagnose this? What studies do they do? So they have the certain age group, and they'll say, okay, order mammogram, order ultrasound, order CAT scan, order PET scan. And there are different guidelines and algorithms or pathways based on the tumor subtype, based on the stage, if they're going to get treatment before surgery or after surgery. So there's guidelines that we all follow that standardize what we do so that patients can understand, one, it's not just arbitrary, let me pull out of the hat what drug you're going to get or what surgery we're going to do. It's been researched and standardized across the country. So that's a really important thing, I think, for patients to look at. And then as far as understanding, so that's the standard of care. You will never get less than that.
Than what you could get, right.
And then in the clinical trial setting, you will always get more monitoring, more medication, probably more lab tests, more attention. right? And so for
Right.
people who are worried about falling and slipping through the cracks in a clinical trial, that is
It's not
just,
gonna happen.
it's
Not gonna
just
happen.
not going to happen. You know, Ricky, I'll say real quickly, I was on a panel back in October, one of many, and it was one of the most powerful panels that I was on. We were talking about clinical trials, and a woman was on the panel with me who had been to one of the last talks given by one of the men who had been taken advantage of through the Tuskegee experiments.
Okay.
Wow.
And he gave a talk, and at the end of it, he, you know, that somebody said, so what do you think about clinical trials? And see, this is exactly why we don't want to participate. He said, no, this is exactly why you should participate, because I went through this, because I did this so that you wouldn't have to. This should mean something, and it should mean enough to you that you would now understand that things are better for you, so that we can get this information, so that we can have better care. And you opting out of it doesn't honor me.
Help
It
anybody.
doesn't honor that legacy at all. By opting out of trials, we don't honor those people who came before us. There's no honor for Henrietta Lacks in that. There's no
Right.
honor for those
Absolutely.
Tuskegee, I'm calling victims, you know?
I mean, and another thing I would like in terms of like patient education is, so what actually happened after the Tuskegee trials? I mean,
Right.
since
Right.
then, there
Right.
were, I mean, like there was a global movement, if you will, around the injustice of what happened there. So much so that now you have to go through vetted levels of authoritative certification to even talk to people. Okay, I can't even like ask you a set of questions without having a certification that says I know what ethical research is, I know all about Tuskegee, I know what they did wrong, I know what the harms are, and then I have to show this committee of people explicitly what every step of my research is going to be, what I'm going to do. I'm not even allowed to stick you to take any blood if you're not already getting stuck by a needle for your treatment. So we're not doing anything to harm you, not even a prick on your finger. You know what I'm saying? So there are now levels of protections that are in place as a result of the injustices that were done. And to also say, a lot of those injustices were done because the people who did them had not only did they not have a regulatory sort of enforcement body making sure they didn't do it, but they just didn't care. And I think that, now in terms of clinical trials, you have a lot of guardians, behind the scenes to ensure that no harm comes to you.
And we
And
have researchers like you, Dr. Melissa. I mean, that you're in the
absolutely.
lab, that we know that Black women are in the lab. We should feel better about that. And you are driving
Exactly.
so much of this triple negative research. And so we so appreciate the work that you do. And I know that you're grooming a lot of Black babies to
Yes.
help you in the lab to help, grow some more babies. We got to grow these babies and bring them along and mentor them and bring them into science, and we'll keep
True.
trying to do that too.
We
Yeah.
have to fortify that pipeline. That's why these pipeline programs and mentoring programs like what
Right.
Touch
That's so
BBCA
important.
does are so
Right.
important, one, for the health literacy and educating people and
Right.
getting rid of some of these mixed messages about what cancer research is and why we shouldn't be involved, to helping us understand why we need to be involved at every single level, from the trial design to the people who are explaining it to patients, to the
That's
people
right.
who are drawing the blood, to the people who are analyzing the data, to the people in the pharmaceutical boardrooms who are publishing this data. And think about the
Yes.
marketing to even, who are we marketing to, and how are we
Yes.
making sure that at
Right.
every single level we
Right.
are represented. There's
That's
a
right.
spot at this
That's
table.
right.
It is so big. The spot at the table for everybody.
We
This
own,
table is
We're
never
in
ending.
all the
we
rooms.
own
That's
the
right.
table. Yeah.
All the rooms, all the
We're in
places,
all the
all the
rooms.
seats.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why is because breast cancer isn't just one disease. Even if you have triple negative breast cancer, stage
Yeah.
for stage, your cancer is unique. Your cancer journey is unique. And our hope is that, you would watch these programs and feel empowered. And leave with some takeaway items. So I'm going to ask Dr. Melissa, and I'm going to ask Crystal. I'm going to ask you for 3. Dr. Davis, I'm going to ask you for 1. Crystal is our advocate, and she's got to give 3 things that people can do to feel more empowered as a result of this, hopefully this program, but just your story in your life. And then Ricky, we'll wrap it up with our own contact information, and we'll have this conversation again, right? You're going to tell us about it.
So I think one of the things I would leave people with is what we opened with, and that is ask questions, be empowered, stay informed. Information from research is ever changing. So what was standard of care 10 years ago is not standard of care today. So make your doctor become, very open-minded about what is going on. Ask as many questions as you want, and if you don't get the answers you feel comfortable with, maybe like Dr. Mo said, you need to find some other options so that you can get the answers that you need. And for me, the reason why I'm here is because I saw the injustices that were still ongoing, even in the context of research where, again, just dismissing the population as being hard to reach or that they're non-compliant, so just know and feel empowered that we are here, we are warriors, we are not going anywhere, and we will change the tide. It's already changing.
Yeah. Yep. And we are in San Antonio doing that this week, right?
Exactly.
Right.
All right. You asked, Dr. Monique challenged me with 3 things to, I guess, leave everyone with. Be your own advocate.
Yes.
Do not be intimidated with your doctor.
Yeah.
You may not have DO or MD or PhD, but you know what? You do have important letters, and that's PATIENT. Nobody knows your disease better than the person experiencing it from that perspective.
Awesome.
Number 2, seek a patient mentor. Seek a woman sisters network was useful for me. Find someone who looks like you, who's been there before, and let that patient mentor you on your healing journey. And third, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Include mental health in your overall wellness plan. That's a whole nother show, but we talk a lot about the other aspects of health. Make sure that you're taking care of your mental health too. And that's what I wanted to share.
That was your great lead in, because we're doing a show on mental health next.
No way.
Yes, next
Wow.
we're going to do a great show on basically we're going to do a self-help analysis assessment.
That's
and teach you how
wonderful.
to understand what you need, so you know what to
Absolutely.
ask for from a mental health perspective, because we want everybody to leave 2020 behind and go into
Please.
2021, the New Year's resolution to lose weight and whatever you're going to do. And that, no, we're going to talk about how you be your best self
Yes.
and have the best mental health situation in 2021. So that's our show next week. Thanks for setting that up.
I'll be there.
That was huge.
Yes.
And I think it's so
Yeah.
important because, the stress doesn't get worse with the diagnosis. All the stuff you had going on in life and all the things happened in 2020 and COVID and everything else is all compounded. And so finding and forming a plan for you for 2021 and beyond, but figuring out what works to help work on your stress is going to be something that is so important, because your nutrition's involved, your sleep, your rest, all those stress genes, all that stuff that Dr. Melissa was talking about, that impacts how your body performs and how your body heals and how your body recovers and how it responds to these medications. So it's not just about, eating the right foods, but it's about getting that mind right and getting that body right and all the things that Crystal talked about. So I thank you guys. We want to make sure we thank our sponsor, right, Ricky?
Yep. And you got to get all the cancers out of your life. I always say that, get all the cancers out of your life. And if you need help, if you want a mentor, you know how to reach me, Ricky at Touch BBCA. Go on our Facebook page. We will get you a mentor. We'll get you a buddy to talk to with whatever disease you're in. We'll help you get into a trial. We'll do whatever, reach out. We're here. You know how to reach me at Ricky Dove or at Touch BBCA. And we really want to thank OncoSec for sponsoring this show and for all the work that they're doing to develop the therapies that we need and to advance the science on triple negative. So we so appreciate them working with us and everything that they do, and the Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation. Haley Dinnerman, I'm attached at the hip with her. She's my sister from another mother, and she's really gotten me into advocacy. So I thank her for helping us do this show, and I love you guys. Thank you so much. I got girl crushes all around.
Thank you.
It's true.
Same here.
that this has been, as always, every week, relatable, reliable, and real. That is what we set out to do
Yeah.
every single week here on
Yeah,
The Doctor
love
Is
it.
In. So we will see you guys next Wednesday night. The Doctor is in.
Resty love.
Bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Thank you.
Love. Love. Thank you
Take
guys.
care.
Bye.